When is a client's venting in session useful, helpful, healthy? When is their venting in session actually harmful to them or harmful to the therapeutic process? We're going to answer those questions and more today and help you to know how to make the most out of sessions with clients who use that time to vent a lot so that you can turn it into therapy that is serving them even better than the way that it's currently being used. So some clients use sessions as like a primary space to vent. And I just want to sort of point out that clients are going to base what happens in session really entirely on how their previous therapist sessions, perhaps with other therapists before you, have shaped those sessions with them. So their understanding from perhaps being in therapy prior to working with you is that therapy is just for venting, that's what you do. And or they may be in therapy for the first time with you, and in doing that they may not know that there are alternatives to how you can use therapy sessions, not just for venting, right? So we have to keep in mind as therapists that the client's world perspective or experiences with therapy might be very different than ours. We may have a sense of or an understanding that venting might have some healthy aspects, but otherwise may not be the most healthy use of therapy sessions. But the client doesn't necessarily know that. We always have to try to step into their shoes and think like them so that we can also help to do something different in session if that is what we're aiming to do. So is venting in session healthy? Is it helpful? Is it a good use of therapeutic time? So for starters, this is highly dependent on the client. A client that comes in for the first time and is venting, meaning they're sharing all of the things that have happened, they're kind of giving you a big update about where their challenges are, where their strengths are in life. Maybe there's a lot of things that they're very overwhelmed by or they have had a very difficult time with. So venting in those cases, meaning they're sharing or they're kind of dumping a lot, or there's a lot of emotional charge, there's a lot of talking and sharing about their experiences, that would be a really healthy use of what the client may call venting kind of in the beginning. They're kind of doing this kind of big kind of dump. Clients normally often say in the beginning, like, I don't even know where to start, or I guess I'll just update you on everything that's happened. And so, other than the questions that we specifically and pointedly ask them in the beginning of a session, they may come in and just say, okay, well, here's what's happened. And it's a good opportunity for us to listen. And even if this looks like venting, because we're really taking stock, right? We're taking in a lot of information. We're hearing everything that's being shared. We're hearing what's being said and what's not being said. However, if a client continues to, after the first session or two, when they're doing like a big share, front-loading share of everything that's been happening, if every week when they come in, they sit down and then they sort of launch into, here's what's been happening, here's how I feel about it, here's all my thoughts on it, and it's almost feels like kind of this exasperated, frustrated expression of all of their feelings, and they might even say, I just need to vent, then we do want to pause and actually try to sort of turn what's happening in session to have more content. And so I'm going to help you figure out how to do that today and in what circumstances that would serve us best. So why is venting not always a great choice? Why is it perhaps even unhealthy for us? One is actually from kind of a neuroplasticity perspective. When we're venting, when we just kind of keep talking about the problem, and then of course it's paired with a lot of emotions, usually a high level of charge, what's happening is that we're actually strengthening the neural pathways of that problem. So a client that is talking about in session or outside of session, going into a venting about whatever they're having a challenge with, is actually just strengthening that neural programming. So it means that the problem and the associated imprint of emotions is probably just going to get stronger. Meanwhile, there's kind of a myth about catharsis, which is that, if we share something that's happening, then it somehow diffuses our emotion or reduces or diminishes the intensity of our emotions related to it. This is a misconception based on research that says that venting actually really strengthens or reactivates emotions and is actually maximizing those emotions. So if we pair that with this myth that catharsis is not really helpful in that way, we pair that with that neuroplasticity, that venting is actually strengthening neural pathways. And then we also pair that with the fact that this is reinforcing negative emotions, meaning that the client is going into a lot of negative emotions. It's activating even more negative emotions. And then on top of that, they're getting physiologically aroused, which is going to add to that neural strengthening the neural pathways. Then what's happening is that this episode of sharing is actually doing damage to the client because it's becoming the focus of their sessions. They've become more physiologically activated. They've become more emotionally activated. We've strengthened the problem in the brain patterning, and we are not actually diminishing or coping with problems. So lots of times clients that are coming in and venting a lot, you'll notice that there's their focus of therapy is actually usually around crisis. There's usually a repetitive pattern of being in crisis or being problem oriented. And what's happening is so much of the session is getting dominated by venting or sharing the crisis that there's not a lot of room in the session for problem solving, processing, building skills in order to be able to help the client. Interestingly, this is one of the reasons that, one of the many reasons that DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, was seen as such an advantage for clients, especially for folks that had borderline personality disorder. I was a DBT therapist for over 10 years. Because part of that was that clients that have a borderline personality are prone to more crisis, right? They typically experience more crisis because they have less emotion regulation skills. So more things in life will feel like a crisis. And also because they do have a difficulty regulating their emotions and tolerating distress, they're not only more likely to interpret life or experience it more as a crisis, but they also are more likely to create crisis. Mostly in part because it's so hard for them to tolerate the emotions in their inner world that they might create crises in their environment on the outside of them. And so, it was, I think, Marsha Linehan's, to her great credit and her great wisdom, noticed that typical normal therapy where people was client-centered, person-centered therapy, where the person would come in and just talk and the therapist would say, how do you feel about that? And just create a lot of space for them, was actually really damaging for folks that are prone to emotional dysregulation or to crises for all the reasons that I just mentioned, but also because the clients then are just getting more dysregulated in session and then leaving more dysregulated and going out into the world. Also, therapy was proving to be very unhelpful when it's so crisis oriented because there's really not enough room, time, or space for skill development. So this is why DBT in part is so skill focused, because it's saying clients are missing skills to be able to regulate these emotions. And if we don't provide it to them, then what's going to happen is they're just going to keep circling the drain of the crises all the time with basically no way out because they have emotion regulation skill deficit. But if we import skills in, and as they're kind of circling around that crisis, we keep helping them to use those skills, then there's a way out of being in constant crises. And instead, there's the opportunity to be able to use skills. Okay, so if clients are coming in and venting a lot, we don't want to judge them, and we surely don't want to shame them for that, right? Because again, they may not know that therapy could be anything other than just venting. Depends on their experiences in the past. And B, what they are venting about is very real to them. It's very powerful. It might be very charged. It might be very painful. So we surely want to support them, not judge them, certainly not shame them, but we want to give them some co-create some opportunities to step outside of that. So the first thing to do if the client is in sort of another venting episode is to, of course, validate them. Validate is always the first step to everything. So to all effective communication. So the venting would be, that sounds really hard. It seems like a really difficult thing that happened. I could really understand where you're coming from. It makes sense that upsets you so much. I can see that from where you're standing, right? So we're doing a lot of that validating there, because if we don't, then the client also may not be willing to go outside of the crisis or outside of the venting, because they might think they have not been heard. So people that go on and on about things, or get louder, or sort of more volume emotionally or in volume, it's because they do not think that they've been heard. So we have to validate in order to make sure that they know we've heard and we understand how hard this is for them. So that's step one. The second step is to ask the client if it would be okay to do something else. So my suggestion is that at some point you try to co-create the session, take a teeny bit of leadership in the session and say, I hear you. I hear all of the things that you just shared. It sounds like it's really difficult. Would it be okay with you if we now that we both really understand the problem that you've experienced, would it be okay with you if we move into some other parts that might be more helpful to you? Would it be helpful to you? Would it be okay if we try to understand the origin of these emotions, or identify why this is so difficult for you? What is particularly triggering for you about this? Or can we spend some time trying to develop some ways to cope with this really hard challenge? And so this is interrupting the client in their stream of venting, and I'm aware that a lot of therapists find that very difficult to do. If you do not sort of build the confidence to interrupt a client when they are in kind of venting episode after venting episode, you may ultimately just lose them. And you might lose them because you're colluding with them not making progress. In other words, if every session is just crises, there might be a point where the client realizes they're not really making any progress either. And they might say, well, all I do is come here and vent. I could just do that with my friends and, save my money or save my time. So it's not worth it to me. Or they might, if you ever do try to speak or interrupt that venting, they might fire you because you are not hearing them. So in the absence of validation, you're very likely to get fired if you're sort of interrupting venting. But so this is why the validation is so essential. And then on top of that, if we are asking permission of the client, would it be okay if we spent a little time on this? Might it make sense to you if we spend some time on problem solving this? Because I don't want you to have to keep going through this challenge, and I don't think you would want to either. Would it be all right if we make a little space for thinking about the skills that you might use here, or identifying the triggers that have happened, or understanding this scenario from a processing perspective? Can we do a little bit of that? So you have to be willing to interrupt, and then also have these questions on the ready that you feel really comfortable with. You have to be able to have questions that feel like ones that are empathetic but also assertive, where you're saying, hey, can we try this? Can we do that? Would it be okay with you to spend some time on that, so that we have buy-in from the client, but also so that the client is not offended by the fact that we are kind of interrupting this venting episode to see if we can make room for other things. And then in doing that, we can also ask them this question, which I think is pretty essential, which is, would you like to feel differently than this? I can see you're very upset about this. This is incredibly difficult. Would you like to feel differently than this? Almost every client, hands down, will go, yes, of course I want to feel differently. And of course they do want to feel differently. However, the problem is captivating. The problem and the emotional charge of it, which is highly addictive. Again, we have that neural programming of the brain. It's very, very seductive to stay in the problem for clients. And so when we say something like, would you like to feel differently than this? Then they might say, yes, of course I do. And then say, wonderful. Would it be okay if we spend some time on helping you to feel differently now? And that might be helping you to solve the problem, helping you to understand the triggers more, helping you to understand what's unique about this problem for you, or helping you to develop coping skills to be able to not be as dysregulated by this issue that you're venting about, right? And so when we ask the client the question, would you like to feel differently than this, and how would you like to feel? Then what happens is it's making space now for them to have the opportunity to be able to identify how they want to be and who they want to be in these scenarios. And then now you have your opportunity to say, great, let's help you get there. Okay, you want to feel more calm when your husband's critical to you, or you want to feel more centered and grounded when your children disrupt your schedule. Okay, thank you for telling me how you want to feel or how you want to be. Now let's you and I get busy on helping you to be able to achieve that reality of feeling differently, coping differently, not being as triggered by it, et cetera, right? So this is one of the ways that we can take kind of the beautiful process for people of wanting to share and express what's happening for them. But when it's starting to veer into where it's unhealthy, it's not helping them in therapy, they're not going to make progress, their sessions are typically very crisis oriented. When we're noticing that, it becomes our job and not the client's job. It is not the client's job to know that venting is unhealthy for them, or to know that they that it makes sense to interrupt that and to try to create another path in the therapy session. That's not the client's job to do that. That is our job, because we're the one kind of holding the space of what is healthier for people versus what is not, and we hold that space based on our training and based on our understanding of what it is that the client actually wants. So if their venting is actually going against what ultimately they want, if they want to feel more peaceful in life, they want to feel more grounded, they want to feel happier, then chronic venting is not going to get you there, is it? Actually, it would be problem solving and developing more coping skills that would help you to get there, right? So we can also help the client to kind of re-loop back to their original goals and say, do we both have a good understanding of what this problem is, and could we now pause on the sharing of the problem so that we can actually start building more of those coping skills so you can live the happy life that you desire. I'll also add in that clients that are venting a lot, very often that's what's happening in other areas of their lives too. So therapy does not need to be a duplicate of what they're already doing with their friends and already doing with their family and already doing with the person they have their problem with. That's not valuable use of therapy. Therapy needs to, on its own, stand out as something quite different than relationships with friends or relationships with family. And in order to do that, that means that the therapist and the client are really co-creating that session. And this is a term that I sort of make up for sessions. I find that it's one of the best ways for us to hold the idea that therapists can shape sessions with clients. And that is, in my language for that, the way that I like to talk about that and train other therapists, and that is to talk about co-creating the session. So I hope you found this to be useful. Please try it. Please try interrupting your client when they're venting in the scenarios that I discussed it would be most useful, and then help them to kind of pivot to other ways that we can make therapy much more useful for them and much more healthy for them and not just reinforcing the problem, both physiologically, emotionally, and of course, in our neuroplasticity. Have an awesome day. Please try all of the skills that we talk about here and give us some feedback about how they work. Also, if you're interested in learning more hands-on, experiential practice with being a psychotherapist, but also learning a ton of holistic tools, including IFS, EFT, energy healing, spiritual counseling, life coaching, meditation, mindfulness. I could go on. Please check out the Advanced Holistic Counseling and Coaching Certification. It is chock full of so much information, but also it is a hands-on experiential program that actually transforms the lives of the therapists and coaches and the clients that they work with. Be well.